For coming in today, and thank you for joining us. This is we're obviously starting to get to the second half, the tail end of the TakeOver conference. It's been amazing so far. Have you been enjoying yourself at TakeOver? Yeah, it's fantastic, great. There's been a lot of great conversations going on, and I'm really looking forward to this one here today because I have a huge soft spot for sports. As a lot of you, as Dave and Raleigh definitely know up here because of our past working lives and professional and personal lives together. We've spent a lot of time in a lot of sporting events, and it's to me, sports is an interesting field because it is the one place I think you can touch audiences the closest because it's something where they feel the loyalty, they feel the connection, they feel patriotic around it. Like there is something about sports that drives people insane and drives people to love. And I think that's what's so fascinating about sports. And today what's happening with the disruption in all forms of media and all kinds of content, it's been really interesting to watch what's happening in the sports space. And as you've probably been hearing at a lot of the discussions we've been having so far at TakeOver, we're not here really just to talk about the kind of mechanics of the disruption, but today is really the opportunity to talk with those experts who are right there in the thick of it, in the field, and actually dealing with disruption, and actually sometimes taking the step first to actually disrupt themselves. So we're going to hear some great stories today from these folks. And again, this is our opportunity to hear from people who are literally in the thick of it. And so we're really excited to have you all here today. Thank you. So I wanted to throw out the opening question around just innovation and the kinds of things that you're seeing today. And we talk about disruption and what's been going on in the sports field. And instead of talking about the challenges, because we know there's many, I want to look at the positive side and talk a bit more about what are the opportunities there as you see technology kind of breaking down barriers between sports leagues, broadcasters, and the fans themselves. What are you doing? What are you seeing right now in your field as you're trying to kind of get through it? And what kind of things makes you excited about the opportunities that now technology is bringing and disruption is bringing to your area? John, I want to start with you.
Yeah, one thing is, it's like being in sports and media, it's crazy time right now, right? It's like everything is totally being disrupted from more and more people watching video digitally, from people cutting cord. So how many people, show of hands, don't actually pay a traditional cable or satellite provider?
Lots of hands.
That's more than I thought. That's scary. Okay, so that's part of what we have to deal with.
Did you really want to ask that? Did you really want to know?
But but we are trying to deal with it. But who else? So all these non-traditional companies are becoming media companies, Netflix's, Amazon's, Hulu's, YouTube, Apple, Facebook. So when you think about disruption, and it's you normally think about disruption is coming from startups. In this case, it's coming from huge, huge players, the biggest companies in the world. So that is super scary. And then, in particular in sports, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, they're all going after live rights, which is, the area that, we as CBS Sports are playing in. So it's a little scary, but, that's what makes it exciting, right? It's, if it nice and boring, comfortable, it wouldn't be as fun. So, so those things we're seeing, and we're trying to attack that too, right? So, a lot of the sports networks, a lot of them actually are still very dependent on that sort of cable bundle. And, they get a lot of money from them, and, all the cable bundles are, very much dependent on that sports to actually drive people to continue to subscribe. So, we've been tackling that straight on, and particularly we launched a 24/7 live streaming sports network that's free, no authentication required, so very seamless. And so, I think back to what Joe was talking about in the keynote earlier this morning. It's build for the future now. Yeah, so there's some people, and actually the reason why it's surprising that so many people raise their hand is for a lot of sports fans actually haven't cut the cord yet, primarily because of sports. So, so we built this thing, not necessarily for the cord cutter, but for the future cord cutter.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Raleigh, Raleigh and I worked together at Twitter, by the way. So we were handling a lot of sports brands there. Now you've started your own company, and you are actually consulting with and working together with Players Tribune. And what an interesting place Players Tribune is. And I don't know if you remember, we were both at Twitter, I think, when Players Tribune launched, and there was a lot of discussion about why? Like, that's not going to work. Like, what on earth are these athletes thinking, that they can go around and start their own brand? Like, what's up with that? And here it is, like the massive, like the place where athletes go to announce, to to talk about their personal lives. Like, it's an amazing content-rich space, and that's what you're doing there, right? You're working on the content side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, thank you all for having me today. Any excuse to wear a Britney mic, I am in on all day. So as an only child, I have a word limit, and thank goodness they have a clock. But so to Kirsten's point, I am working at the Players Tribune on content and development, so packaging a lot of how these athletes are thinking and bringing it to various platforms to tell their story. And I think the most interesting thing, to sort of answer your question about the power of that innovation, for those who aren't familiar in the room, it's direct access to athletes, what they're talking about. So much like Twitter, where they have this thing in their hand and they can have a conversation, we're doing a lot with storytelling. And I think it's getting deeper in the stories that these athletes have to tell, whether it's Kevin Love on mental health or Steve Nash on gun control, or then something lighter, of course, as we like to have, because these athletes are people and they run the gamut of who they are and how they interact. But the Players Tribune is really eliminating some of the friction to tell a deeper story and then get that out. We have something that's coming up around the World Cup that is really in-depth storytelling with these athletes, 2 hours with each individual over the 32 teams across, upwards of 50 athletes that'll start hitting this week. And it's fascinating to see what our team, and David and I were talking about this, from a sense of trust, can get out of them, and then all of a sudden it's kind of off to the races.
Yeah, and Dave, you're handling some of the most powerful brands, at least here in Canada, between the Raptors, Maple Leafs, TFC. How has this disruption reoriented you? Like, what, as someone who, as you like to say, you're in charge of everything from stadiums to hot dogs. Here you are with a lot of fans who are in the middle of all this. How has innovation changed what you do?
Well, we're really excited about it. We see it as nothing but a pure greenfield for how to engage with our fans differently. And some of that's going to be pretty pedestrian stuff and has already stood up. And you can go to any stadium here in North America now, and you can probably get your concessions delivered to your seat. You probably entered the building on a mobile ticket. So there's some stuff that is, again, pretty, I guess, expected as the world moves increasingly to digital. What we're trying to do at Maple Leaf Sports right now is look at, okay, well, what can we really do to unlock engagement? And when I think, I'm an enormous fan of Players Tribune. I think what you've done to really build engaging and compelling stories is so important because, look, I think you alluded to this as in your introductory remarks, but nobody needs this, right? It is a very unique offering of pro sports, right? It's not insurance or healthcare or food or shelter, right? So it's only, our fans are only customers because they love us. And I think as we think about how, look, every team in the world will say, well, we got the best fans in the world. Well, what does that mean? And I think at Maple Leaf Sports, what we're trying to increasingly make it mean is that we understand who that customer is as an individual and are trying to use digital technologies to talk to that fan as an individual using the supercomputer they now have in their pocket. That's our future, is really moving from one-to-many communication to one-to-one.
Yeah, and hasn't the pace just picked up so much in terms of how fast news gets out? In fact, I think you were the subject of news a little bit earlier today. Dave is actually, will tell us a bit about it. There was a piece of news up about Dave for about 5 minutes. It got pulled down.
Yeah.
Sure, you can still
so
find it.
I've recently, we're going to announce I've resigned from MLSE. I'm going to move to Europe and work on a global sports brand over there. And I'm not quite in a position yet today to talk about where I'm going. I will be in a couple
exciting.
of weeks. But what I will tell you is...
You heard it here first, kind of.
Sort of. When you look at some of the scale that we have with, let's say some of the top global football properties, where you're getting into not 1 million followers or even 5, 8 million followers like you have here with some of the top teams in North America, but 120 million followers or 100 million people followers on Instagram, on Twitter. there's an incredible opportunity to take your message into a global scale of audience that I find really fascinating.
Didn't exist so much before. Yeah, it's really opened up. When you think about the fan, and I think, I've been a broadcaster for a number of years before this, and we sometimes think about eyeballs rather than the person behind it. We talk about the dollars that they generate as a user or as a fan. When you look at the opportunities through disruption and through innovation, what kind of lens do you look through as your, here you are, John, you're working for a massive CBS brand. How does that brand relate to you as their digital component? Like what is their priority for you as you look to build what it is you're doing for CBS Sports?
So in terms of that, so one thing that helps us in that regards is, so if you look at how CBS is organized, like they basically essentially tore out all the digital properties and stuck them in this unit called CBS Interactive. Now, when I joined a little under 3 years ago, I was like, wow, like why did they do that? Like, I'm in sports digital over here, that reports up to the CEO, on par with CBS Sports TV side. And, then when you're like in there and you start working, it's like, oh, that's why, right? So like, so we can make decisions that are best for digital and not have to worry about sort of that sort of disruption, that cannibalization. So we deal with that way, and I think that actually has helped a lot. So essentially, how we think about it is, some of the things that we do are not necessarily tied. It doesn't have to be tied to that. So on our TV side, we have a bunch of games and things like that. But on our digital side, it's like completely different. Sports rights is kind of complicated. Consumers are not going to get it. We don't really want them to get it because it's just tons of things that are too complicated. But so we deliver the scores, news, and highlights. And if you look at the program that we have, it's all original content. It's all scores and delivering the experience that we want. And it's original to digital and not something that you see on TV.
And that big question around the monetization and how that all works. And Raleigh, you're with a pretty nascent still company when you think about what Players Tribune is and how long they've been around, and there must be some pressure to transition into like what that looks like in terms of how the athletes actually get to take advantage of the fact that they're providing all this major rich content, and what does that mean for what does that mean for them? Are you now working that out in terms of how you're going to be attacking what it means for athletes to be on Players Tribune?
Sure. So obviously, as any entrepreneurial endeavor, at some point you have to decide to make money.
Yeah.
I always thought it was fascinating when living in San Francisco and you would identify, well, now we need a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, to go out and actually make this thing a real viable business. Yeah. And we certainly are looking into the best routes to engage in that way, while not losing the core of it. It was started by Derek Jeter, as he found throughout his career that there was a friction with more traditional media when he wanted to tell his story, and that friction shouldn't lie there. There's really no reason. These are the great entities that allow for those stories to get out in a much bigger way, and we still rely heavily on partnerships like CBS, like NBC, like ABC, CBC, etc. And then, of course, the more non-traditional that are becoming infiltrates in the sense of Netflix and Amazon, etc. So we are looking at ways to make sure that we are keeping the crux of and the foundation of the business to put the athlete first, sort of the power to the players in that sense, and then help them monetize. So whether that's a better look at the way an old fan club used to work, or if it's an athlete channel and helping them power and produce that content, there's a lot of different ways to take it. Certainly our board is having conversations about the best way to take it, and we will continue to ideate so long as we're not losing the crux of that foundation that they get to tell the stories and have final say in what those stories are.
Right. And just, it's interesting because as we move into sports, and I think we all think of sports as being those things that happen in stadiums or on, ice arenas, like we think in the very traditional sense of what sports looks like. And yet there's this whole new realm of sports, which is between esports, between, what else is going on out there. Like, just for any of you, like, what are you now doing when you look at that side of things, and how, like, is that a distraction from sports, good old-fashioned sports, where you put the uniforms on and you're out on the field, or is it something that's actually additive? Like, is it helpful? Is it distracting? Like, how are you looking at esports and what that world is doing right now?
Well, we're spending a lot of time on that. The NBA maybe well, a lot of people in this room would be familiar that the NBA has started an esports league, then the NBA 2K League. Right out of the gate, 17 teams, 17 of the NBA 30 teams have said we're in. We were an original franchise on that, and we are a few weeks into our life in this space.
Are we doing better there?
I'll tell you what, we're learning an awful lot. And when the board asked me, they said, okay, well, what do you want to accomplish here? I said, well, I just want to learn. I just want to see how we'll go to market. I want to see how the market responds. And of course, you know, there's big businesses out there right now. Overwatch League, League of Legends, and there's a lot of noise about that. And I thought that being involved in 2K, the NBA 2K League, would be a great way to get a toe in the water, learn an awful lot. We are learning an awful lot. There's also just so much curiosity around this. So in fact, you know, I showed the board a 5-year plan where, you know, okay, we'll lose money for a couple of years, break even around year 3, and by year 5 making money. And where in fact we'll make money this year in our inaugural season. So hey, that's good. A lot? No. Game-changing money? No. But I'll tell you, it does give me some encouragement that this might go. I think it's a real bubble right now. I don't know, you know, if we go back, you know, a few months ago before Christmas and it was all about Overwatch, and now it's all about Fortnite. So it's so hard to know what's going to come around the corner in this space. I'm not sure we're right now in the mood to write an 8-figure check to join a league that no one can guarantee us is going to exist 5 years from now. Yeah. Now, it could go to the moon, it could crash, we just don't have enough intelligence right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of these, like a lot of the esports are really born in the kind of mobile environment, and when you think about, you know, where CBS, for example, built its legacy was in more the traditional sense. How are you now approaching that, John? Like when you look at esports and what's happening, how when you've already talked about the big competition when you have Facebook and Twitter and everybody looking at the same rights as you in the traditional sense, what about these things that are really born in mobile, and how does that affect you?
I mean, it affects us, so I'll have to say we haven't spent that much time diving into esports. We're looking at it, we're monitoring, we're trying to figure out what the best way to play in esports is in a way that makes sense for us, right? So, you know, so with that, you know, I think longer term, and then based on what I'm saying, it's not one of my top 3 priorities. But longer term, we need to worry about it because our brand is very much tied to NFL, college football, you know, and for the longest time, NFL seemed like it was the, you know, unassailable fort, like everyone needed to watch that. And you look at the last 2 years and you're like, oh my God, like what the, you know, it's like we never thought numbers would actually be going down, ratings or whatnot. And so, you know, what does that say about NFL? It's like, you know, there are a whole bunch of theories, the kneeling, the head injuries, stuff like that. So longer term, where it's threatening to us, it's like if people stop watching NFL or these other sports and these rights, and more, if you look at some of the demographic studies, like the 18 to 24-year-olds, like they watch less sports and they actually, you know, prefer esports over normal sports. So, you know, how do we play in that when, you know, those people start to grow, you know, older than 24? So they become a larger part of our audience.
Well, and something else kind of disruptive right now is like the things are starting to loosen up around gambling, right? Like gambling is something now we're starting to see in the league sense. So does that change? And in terms of priorities, like is that something that is going to affect your space? And
yeah, I mean, we're already in the gambling space. So we have a property called Sportsline. So that's all about sort of premium content subscriptions for the sports gambler. So here are the best value picks, you know, based on Vegas insiders as well as combination with our, you know, proprietary predictive model. So, you know, we already have that. It's actually a nice business. We got tons of subscriptions for that. Obviously, with gambling becoming, you know, more and more legalized, like that'll become a bigger part of our strategy. 2, from a pure sort of media spend side, our audience skews very much towards, you know, people who, you know, play fantasy seriously and then place bets on sports, you know, and that plays into, all right, well, if someone wants to reach that audience, like they're spending money on us, and you know, that's helpful for the bottom line. And then finally, with our programming, you know, our core and our voice is all around, you know, that fan who actually loves the numbers, you know, actually wants to know what happens in the game. Not, you know, so we're focused on that core, less so around like the culture of sports or the social issue around sports, the politics of sports. So, you know, you see other players moving in that direction. That's just not our core. Our core is that a more serious fan who and gamblers are part of that.
He's
Are a big part of that.
He's right in. What about you, Dave?
So I can't speak for MLSE because
Right.
we're not ready to
But what are
take
you
an
seeing in
official
this
position
space?
on this.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you look at some of the leagues overseas, what they'll tell you is it's been a fantastic success from a business perspective. And that I think, initially there's a lot of concern around, well, does this, match fixing, for example, is this going to lead to corruption? And in fact, they found the complete opposite. That now you've got, rather than betting and action happening inside a black box in a black market, you've got data, you've got analytics, it's all opened up. And in fact, you're able to see very interesting behavior. And if that behavior warrants some additional investigation, now you've got a path into it. So they think it's increased transparency,
Interesting.
actually decreased match fixing. And I'll tell you, from an engagement perspective, it goes through the roof. I mean, everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but many people, including myself, have maybe put $20 on a game here or there, and your engagement level soars.
Right.
So I think it's something that has a tremendous opportunity to engage the fan in a whole new way and inject a whole lot of fun. We're starting, the law has begun to change, I guess, in the U.S.
You see the loosening up, yeah.
Loosening up.
Yeah.
It has not. I think there's a climate where it's loosening here. I mean, I don't know what's happening in Canada right now. It's all weed and gambling. But
We're busy, we're busy with
I don't know which one will get to the finish line first. Looks like maybe weed. But it's something that I think, if it does come into Canada, will open up tremendous opportunities for teams, for broadcasters, for publications, for data analytics companies. I think it'd be a huge boon to the business.
And how do-
So you see engagement go through the roof when that'll happen. And so so 1 year, by the way, and this kind of paints this picture, it's like March Madness, right? Everyone fills out a bracket, usually plays for some amount of money. 1 year I forgot to submit a bracket. This was many years ago. And March Madness without that is so boring. So boring. I was like, oh wait, this is why I fill out a bracket. This is why I participate in pools. And so, so gambling would be like that, but amped up to a much higher degree.
Yeah, and it's always felt like this fantasy gambling was sort of an interim step or a way to get that engagement while staying legally compliant. So I'd rather, fantasy, let's just go right on to gambling.
Yeah.
How do players play in this?
Well, it's tough, right? Because
Yeah.
if they're participating in the game, they get
Yeah.
in some situation. And it's interesting, I mean, going all the way back to the Twitter days, my first role was being in sales on the gaming side. So watching that explode, I can remember my first day being at the E3 conference, which is happening simultaneously right now. I was fully suited up, actually had on heels instead of these deal sleds. And I watched a stormtrooper come up the escalator next to me, and our CRO at the time was standing right next to me, and he goes, "This is what you do now." I was like, oh, okay. But
I don't know
between
if that's
that,
a threat or a promise.
yeah, exactly. Between that and then also being on the sales side when DraftKings and FanDuel, the companies that were most domestically dominant, were going at it before all the regulations. The dollars that they were putting into the business
Yeah.
were huge. So
Yeah, they were
now they're
spending
going to
huge
want
I
on
miss
to.
those
Yeah.
dollars.
Yeah, they're gonna. Yeah, I miss them too. I remember walking outside in San Francisco and looking up in the sky and thinking, I've got like 1 minute to relax, and there went a plane with a DraftKings thing on the back of it. And I was like, no, it's not happening
everywhere.
today.
They're
everywhere. But yeah, the players themselves can participate in an alternative sport, but they can't participate in their sport. So finding a way to tie them to a brand or to an association with gambling is obviously tough. To your point, I agree on all sides that it's brought down a lot of match fixing. It does bring transparency, and people are excited to pay attention. But we'll have to see how we can nuance that. On the esports side, these guys and gals are playing all the time. All these games. And I mean, if it's any idea of the concurrence, Drake, local hero, and Ninja played, and it was 770,000 concurrents on Twitch. And that was not planned. That was tweeted. So, there used to be that sign, the revolution will be tweeted. That was about something else, but I can say that I think everything else will be brought in that space to invite and have conversations, and the community aspect only gets better when you bring sports and esports together in that kind of conversation.
So as we think about, here we are in this kind of intersection of, technology, innovation, sports fans, what are you working on right now that makes you excited in terms of something that's, something that's going to change the way that you work Is there something right now that you're working on that you can give as an example? Because we'd really love to hear kind of the real life stories of what it's like, and maybe even something that you've been dealing with that maybe didn't go the way you expected it to. And we can always learn lessons from those things that don't always work out the way we expected. Is there
Sure. I'll tell you where we're struggling right now. We have a very clear vision of, if I go back to the remarks I was making about one-to-one,
right,
empowering one-to-one. And I don't think that's revolutionary. I just think it's an incredible opportunity. Envisioning it, not the hardest part. Building it has been a nightmare. And trying to get, I oversimplified this. I thought this is all ones and zeros and that this should be easy. But trying to build a unique customer profile, whether that customer, they're following us on Twitter, they're one of our Season C holders, they bought something in our store, they entered a contest, trying to get that all harmonized into a unified view of the customer sounds like it should be pretty easy to a simple person like me. We've been 8 figures in 2.5 years trying to make this all work. I think we're going to get there, and we're seeing some really, really encouraging, we're just starting to get some dividends out of that strategy now. But it's been a nightmare.
And do you take that on yourself? Like, are you at MLSE? Are you
No,
hiring engineers and trying to figure out this data set? Or
no,
what,
we're trying
what are you
to find
doing?
the right partners to help us power that.
Right.
I'm a big believer in that's not what we do. So if we can be working with intelligent partners who can understand what we're trying to accomplish and help us accomplish that, I'd rather go buy that service than go build that capability.
Yeah. And then I know Jonathan, we've worked together. I think Tribal Scale's been doing some things with you as well. Like, when you look at innovation, how much of that can you build inside and how much are you looking outside?
Yeah, we're looking at both ways. So just to sort of continue on that one-to-one thing. So, I mean, that's hugely important to us, but same thing. It's like we've talked about it, we've chipped away a little about it, but it's like it's not quite there. I think the closest we have is currently a mobile app. I guess that makes sense because it's with you all the time. But think about it in the sports world. People are actually more than happy to tell you who their favorite teams are, who their favorite players in the leagues and stuff like that. So, that's where we, our mobile app, like first thing you download the app, like we ask you who your favorite teams are, and then what happens then is like on your scoreboard, you see those more prominently. On the news feed, you see stories related to your team more prominently, and then also we send you a ton of push notifications. So to the levels of such that, when I talk about how many push notifications we send, people are like, "You're just spamming them?" It's like, well, no, actually, back to Kirstine, your original point, it's like they're so passionate. If you're passionate about that, like you could send them pushes all day. Like, we have stuff, I'm sure there's some fans and some teams, like we're probably sending upwards of like 20, 30 a day.
Amazing.
But they want that. It's like, someone scored in the game. Like, great, they actually want to know that. So, so yeah.
I got all yours during March Madness, by the way.
Yeah.
But I went to Virginia, and you guys may have heard the storyline. They lost. They were a number 1 seed. So I started to throw my phone, so you might owe me one. Just saying. Just saying.
I'm carrying 2 right now. So.
Perfect.
Jonathan really raises an excellent point, and I'll tell you, if there's a second aspect of this we're really struggling with, it is governance.
Right.
And how are we going to not kill the golden goose here ourselves? So
You get the Facebook problem.
Yes, data and privacy, huge issue, but also, look, every part of this business is hungry for revenue, whether that's a hat or whether that's a ticket or whether it's a ticket offer. We've really got to make sure that we don't become our own worst enemies here and that we use and unlock this customer relationship to a mutual benefit, not a unidirectional benefit. And I'm telling you, it sounds like that should be easy. The governance around this is tying us into knots.
I can imagine. And I guess, Raleigh, on your side, because you have players who are representing themselves as well, like when are they giving away too much? Like how could you're having to manage, I guess, both sides of that kind of flow?
Sure. I mean, they only have one time to tell this version of their story.
Right.
And you want it to be done well, and you want it to be done in such a way that gives them the added value that this is the right time or perhaps this is the right medium. So we think through that a lot. I think one of the things you ask about is what I'm most excited by, and certainly figuring out distribution is something we need to work on. Figuring out monetization on behalf of these athletes is something to work on, but something that we've always done, but we haven't really packaged and driven forward is women in sports and telling the different stories, whether you're watching, Serena's story right now on HBO and how different that is and how to think about, well, she's not ranked anymore because she took time to do something that a lot of people would call normal human behavior, but she's got to climb back. So thinking through those storylines and how to tell them, particularly in this environment right now, there's a lot of people clamoring for it. So I'm most excited about that. But back to your point, we have to think about the athlete, whether they're male, female, et cetera, and find a way to make this a valuable extraction of their story over the course of time.
Yeah, and how you don't overexploit that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you heard Sheetal at the top of the conference, we talked about like opportunities and this conference is a chance to listen and be in spaces that you're not normally. So I presume a lot of you here don't necessarily work in sports media, but you're obviously interested in it, and you're here to learn something a bit different. And when you think about innovation and you think about innovation and technology together and the challenges that not just probably the sports world goes through, but everybody is going through as we try to figure our way through this, really interesting, opportunistic, but kind of scary, risky time as well. The lessons that you've learned as you've been transitioning, you've been successful in transitioning in 2 cases here, some pretty major brands into this new space. And Raleigh, you're representing a place that's, a disruptor itself. Like, what kind of advice do you give people as they're kind of looking through, they're going to go back and they're going to go back to their spaces of work and try to figure out, what am I going to take from this particular conversation to help me do my day job? Like, what kinds of pieces of advice do you give people when they think about innovation and how to move forward?
I think for us, it's been a lot about how technology is changing customer expectations in the marketplace. We want it to work.
Right.
We want it now. And we expect those things in a whole different way. We don't want to wait in long call lines. If it's a bot, give me the answer, that's fine. It's a bot, but then we better figure out how to get bots into our business pretty quickly.
Has it turned us into jerks? Is that the problem?
Changing customer expectations. So I think we've got to align. What we're working on is transforming how we think about the customer, and that's making us change our business. So I'll use a really simple example, but the season seat holder. Okay, so foundational in sports, since sports was invented, pro sports was invented 100-something years ago. That's really been about the chair. And what we're really trying to think about is, well, why don't we think about the customer? So 2 years ago at MLSE, we stopped talking about season seat holders, and we started talking about our members. And now we can talk about where that member sits and that member's profile and that member's family and that member's connections, and that's how we're trying to transform the business. And that's really about people expect to be treated that way, not as a piece of inventory or not attached to a piece of inventory, but treated like an individual and a customer.
And the demands, putting the customer first and making sure that their demands are met before they probably even know they have those demands.
Trying,
Yeah. What about you, Raleigh?
I was going to say that we were going to be thinking about it in a different way, but almost as you think about it, I like to say, make your footprint bigger than your foot. So you're thinking about this seat example, right? It's just a seat, but what else surrounds it? So even just in the career space and going back more personally, I like to think about what's on my literal calendar day to day. How does that impact our business? How does it impact the athlete? Who else in the consumer space, et cetera? So I've got my day job, sure, but what can I do to broaden that and stay in a place that makes sure that footprint, while important and needs to be sustained from the day-to-day stuff, is getting bigger and bigger to allow for more impact. So whether that's personally in what you do or professionally in how you think about different areas of your business, I think you can have a lot of success in just thinking through what those things are that make a bigger piece of the whole.
So kind of like a what next or what else kind of attitude. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
I always
That's
sit down
great.
in front of my computer and go, what's next? And everyone's like, oh, there she goes again. We just did something. We're done here. Nope.
Well, I think
You're
she's a
never
good person
done.
to listen to. It's been pretty amazing, your career, so thank you. What about you, John? What advice can you give folks as they
I would
go back?
say, so to build a little bit on what David said, and I think I've heard some of previous panels today, but it does actually still come back to the customer. Like, what do they need? What are their gaps? Where are they headed? Whether it's behaviors due to technology changes, whatever else, cutting the cord. But the next level of it is, it can't just be it has to be viable for the business. There's some, so you may not have to make money right away, but there has to be some path to be you see, okay, yeah, we'll maybe learn something or iterate this way, but at some point, you have to be able to see that path to actually sort of make money for the business. Otherwise, think about I'm in a media business. If I just did something just for the consumer, I have no ads. Then if I have no ads, I have no business and I have no job. So you always have to think about both those in combination.
And what about like the competition? Like how much are you keeping an eye on what's going on out there? Like it's, everyone, like to your point, the expectations are more and more. There's more people, it feels like, in the space trying to solve those expectations and trying to fill those gaps. What about the competition? Are you looking at them? Do you learn from them? Are they doing anything you wish you'd have done first? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, in our business, absolutely. And what's really nice about the NBA or the NHL or Major League Soccer, you're trying to kill each other on the floor or on the ice, but off the court, we're great collaborators. And I'll use the NBA as a great example. And they have a whole team marketing business operations group, and it's large. It's over 100 people, and they're all MBAs, and they've all got great consulting backgrounds, and they're continually soliciting amongst the member clubs what are the best practices, and trying to promulgate them throughout the rest of the league. So I work in leagues where I can call my counterpart at really another team and say, look, we're trying to accomplish this. We're stuck here. How'd you overcome that? And they might say, well, this way, or they might say, we're struggling too, you want to work together? And so it's a really, really privileged position that we have, being able to lean on our partners as we grow these leagues and
It's a
these
great
teams in these
collaboration.
leagues.
Yeah, great collaboration. And Raleigh, I think, is someone other than Jeter going to start their Players Tribune? Like, what's going on out there?
I mean, there are a lot of different things. There's Uninterrupted that's used oftentimes in the same breath. That's LeBron's channel. And I think, you have to stay relevant and make sure you're maintaining your competition. But if you get blinded by them, then you start to do what they're doing, and you have to differentiate. So certainly we pay attention, but Netflix has $8 billion to put to their disposal for content. My job is structuring content. So my role is to go get more dollars from them as opposed to the competitors who are in the space.
Right.
So, you have to acknowledge and make sure you're talking about your blind spots, but don't let those blind you in the end.
Yeah, and that's more about your footprint too, right? You have
Exactly.
to increase that footprint. And what about you, John?
I mean, you have to keep in mind the competitors, but they can't be your sole focus. So here's a good story. When I joined CBS, I'd hear a lot of things like, oh, just we're in the midst of redesigning our website or mobile apps. They're like, oh, just copy what ESPN does. I'm like, okay, but so we're assuming that they've done all the work to be like, oh, they're actually doing the right thing. And so then, by the way, we hired a designer from ESPN. And then I asked him, how do you guys do this stuff? And he's like, oh, we just look at CBS Sports and we copied their stuff. So we're both copying each other's stuff, thinking that everyone knows what they're doing, but it's retarded. So yeah, but yeah. So, but you obviously you do have to keep because that's their consideration set. They're using all these other things. You got to be aware of what they're doing as well. So.
Yeah, and really what is competition nowadays? It isn't really those direct right next to us, is it? It's competition, as we used to like to say in broadcasting, is competition for the viewer's time. It's not just, no one is just sitting around watching TV anymore. They're doing a million different things while the TV is even on. So those distractions, are interesting to play within. Do you see something as a next, just personally for yourselves? And I know you're going on to something next and wonderful, so maybe I won't start with you. But when you think about what is exciting you, what's out there, what next do you want to kind of see in your career? What is the next thing for Raleigh?
Yeah, well, I don't know. We'll see. Stay tuned. But I do think, there's been this interesting, if you think back to when DirecTV and these dish networks started, there's this huge expanse. You're like, how do I pay attention to 1,200 channels? There's no way. I don't know what's on television. This one's about, it's the flea network, and it's all about fleas. I don't know. That's a horrible example. But now you've gone from this full expansion to now it's really being driven back. And if you think about, even if it's just, to your point, on a mobile device, which apps are you actually opening? With what frequency? You can go, if you're on an iOS device, and see on your settings and the percentage, and the bulk of them you're not using. But at some point you thought you would. So what I'm most fascinated by is how this expansion has contracted and now will come back in, and what will be relevant with things like The Athletic, for example, if you're familiar, and I know they are very excited about Toronto sports, but they are the ones who have brought a lot of journalists in-house and said, we recognize it's been difficult for you to post 40 times a day, and we recognize that's not the depth of storytelling you want to do. Come to us, tell these stories, do them in the way that traditional journalism really drove people to get excited. And that's a really cool concept, right? Like you're going back to what people loved for sport or news or entertainment. So I'm excited to see kind of who bubbles up from that and then what value they can add. And certainly we'll play a huge role as we can.
What about you, John?
So I think in general, just like the whole world of TV and the distribution of video content is like the first question was like, there's a lot of things going on. It's crazy. So kind of being in the middle of that, trying to figure it out is pretty interesting for me. It's like, I'm helping, reshape what sort of the future of sports and video is for CBS Sports. It's like, we're going from a world where it's like, what you can show is basically limited by the channels you have on your cable TV package. In our case, it's just 2. But in the digital world, theoretically, you could show as many events, and that restriction goes away. So that opens up a ton of opportunities for what that looks like. Now, the good thing for us is people still watch a lot of sports. People still, and especially for live, people need to still watch sports live. So everything else that's not live, like entertainment-related shows, like that ship has sailed. It's all like Netflix, all these other players. But for sports, we still have a window to figure it out because all the major rights to the sports leagues, they don't come due for another couple of years. So we really have to figure out how to, again, present the right content in the games to the users, distribute it properly, monetize them, whether it's ad-supported free or through your cable provider or direct-to-consumer subscription. We got to figure out, in that small window before that comes up, and then all the big players that I mentioned before come rushing in, and we got to do that better than them.
And Dave, maybe just bring it on home for us. So when you think about what's up there, what's coming up, what makes you excited?
We talked about the pace of change, and how quickly the world is getting very, very small. And if, sports since its invention, has been a really regional proposition, right? You get a hometown team, and that defines who you are as a fan. And I think that's disintegrating really rapidly. And I think that if you want to be a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins or the Shanghai Sharks or a European football club, it really doesn't matter where you are in the world anymore. You can get real-time, great content on your mobile device and define yourself as an individual versus being defined by your birthplace. I think there'll always be a huge piece of community in the way sports brings the community together, but I think that how we define community is going to change. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for all of us, quite frankly, because that's all about a really rich experience for the fan at home.
That's amazing. Well, and so thanks to the panel. This has been an amazing almost hour to spend together, and what a high note to end it on. I think, we heard a lot about the opportunities today. We heard a lot about the challenges for sure, but the fact that, in a space that can be as traditional as sports is, and yet as disrupted as it's been these last couple of years, to see, what you all have done as trailblazers in this space to really kind of build your brands, whether new or traditional, and transition them into this space has been really inspiring for people like myself to watch. So thank you for sharing those stories with the crowd here today, and thank you for being part of TakeOver. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.